Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this December 18, 2014 edition of Nightcast. What's being called the United States-Cuba breakthrough divides Cubans in Havana and the US. Our opening story for tonight, friends, we go to some video related to what's happening in Miami.
Little Havana, the Cuban-American stronghold, where President Obama's surprise decision unleashed a swirl of competing passions.
How many family members did you diagnose? How many family members of you were shot?
We have no moral ground to say what's going on in Cuba as long as we allow torture by American soldiers or American citizens, and they're condoned by the CIA and the American government.
For much of the past 50 years, this suburb of Miami has been like a volcano, waiting to erupt over any change in U.S. policy towards Cuba.
It is a disgrace that the President of the United States is trading prisoners for criminals.
But last night, despite all the shouting, despite the angry debate, the reaction to this seismic change was fairly subdued.
What we're seeing tonight is a lot of passion, but what we're not seeing is that many protesters. If this decision had come 15 years ago, then the streets of Little Havana would have been packed, shoulder to shoulder, with demonstrators.
Domino Park, where Cuban exiles decades ago recreated a small corner of their beloved homeland. This morning, the mood was relaxed. It was hardly a seething hotbed of resentment. The old guard has grown weary. Their grandchildren overwhelmingly favor the restoration of ties.
People change. You know, how many times are you going to bang yourself against the wall until you realize that it hurts? It hasn't worked. The policy hasn't worked.
But there are others who regard this decision as a betrayal. Maggie Cooley's brother was amongst 4 men shot down by the Cuban Air Force in 1996 as he tried to spot people escaping the country in rafts. The president's move to normalize relations is an affront to their memory.
I think he has been a dismal failure. He has gotten absolutely nothing from Cuba. Cuba has gotten everything that they wanted. As far as I'm concerned, as far as the families are concerned, when you establish negotiations with somebody, you win some, you lose some. In this particular case, Cuba has won every single thing, and the U.S. has lost everything.
The landmarks of the Cuban freedom struggle remain. A Republican-controlled Congress will keep the trade embargo in place. But the move to restore ties with communist Cuba does mark a definitive break from the past. And America's Cuban policy is no longer dictated by Little Havana. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Miami.
Friends, in Miami, Florida, and Union City in New Jersey, there are communities that are home to large Cuban-American populations. In those enclaves, both nicknamed Little Havana, local residents, and friends, I noticed we're having a little bit of a problem with our volume. I think maybe that'll straighten it out right there. Okay, oh, actually, we must have bumped that control. Okay. Local residents have mixed reactions to the news. Meanwhile, in Cuba, though opinion was divided, many seemed excited.
Muy emocionada y lo esperaba. Yo deseaba con gran emoción que algún día esto se diera, que las relaciones puedan abrirse, tener un nuevo, un porvenir más para nuestro país, nuestras personas, y no debe haber tanta guerra, tanta...
Adelante para las futuras relaciones entre Estados Unidos y Cuba.
Ya, para nosotros eso, y otra cosa muy importante, el restablecimiento de las relaciones diplomáticas.
Ha sido más lo mismo, tienen que haber cambio. Lo que dice el presidente, que mucho tiempo no ha dado resultados, tienen que haber otra forma que las cosas cambien.
Es una traición, porque esa gente mandaron a matar gente. Esa gente hicieron cosas aquí graves, y yo soy cubano, pero esos tres son tres hijo de mala madre.
I think it's great. I think, you know, interacting and trading and stuff with Cuba, we will look forward to, you know, getting back our, you know, a lot of our Cuban heritage and going to see our family will be easier. And I think it's great.
It's about time. The embargo was a fiasco. It was just giving Castro an excuse for all the shortcomings that they had in Cuba.
Okay, friends, and that's the video on that piece of news. I'm sure we're going to see more. I'm seeing updates flashing in even now that Congress is not real happy about some of what to expect. So I'm sure we're going to be seeing more of that in the news in the days ahead. Going now to Kenya. There's I hope we never see this kind of situation in our Congress in the United States, but in Kenya, lawmakers traded blows, and one had his shirt torn amid a chaotic parliamentary session. I believe we don't have video with it, so I think I'll go ahead and roll this as I tell you about it. Of course, you can hear plenty of excitement. Even though there's not commentary, you can certainly hear.
Not close for, be deleted.
You can certainly hear the row going on in that room. One man had his shirt torn amid a chaotic parliamentary session called to push through a tough new security bill. Opposition MPs shouted, sang, and shredded copies of the bill, warning that Kenya was becoming a political state. Four lawmakers were assaulted in one incident, and two of them engaged in a fist fight in another. The Speaker was forced to adjourn the debate for several hours before it was resumed. In Myanmar, the trial begins over a Buddha insult. And friends, I wish I had my, we still don't have all our camera shots over yet. We're bringing them over and rebuilding them. We spent a year building our last set of shots. We're still attempting to get that main encoder, live streamer, back in operations after we get a new power supply to handle the additional memory put in there, because it was slugging on us and causing the audio to stutter. Some of you heard that for a little more than a week, maybe 10 days or so. We struggled with that. I wish I could have had my horses up here, because this next story relates to the white horse. A New Zealander and two Burmese men have gone on trial in Myanmar on charges of insulting Buddhism. Did I say when I wished I had the horses? This relates to the first seal, the white horse, a religious deception. Some of you will understand that. Others of you, I may have to explain that for you at another time. The men who were arrested last week after posting an image on Facebook featuring a psychedelic picture of Buddha wearing large headphones to promote a drinks event. These two men, if convicted, they could face 2 years in prison on one count, and then I think there's another count of the same, and then another half a year for a third count that's been added. From Yangon, Jonah Fisher reports.
This is one of the more upmarket neighborhoods here in Yangon, and until just over a week ago, this bar here was one of the newest bars. It was a tapas bar, a nightclub called the V Gastro Bar, but as you can see, it's now been closed down, it's all shuttered up, and the reason for that is a picture which the management here posted on their own Facebook page. I'm not going to show you the picture for fear of being prosecuted myself, but it's a picture of the Buddha with big headphones on, surrounded by psychedelic colors, and he's advertising a Buddha bar event involving cheap drinks. Now that picture went viral on Facebook, there were lots of complaints, and then someone got in touch with the police. The management of the bar, Philip Blackwood from New Zealand, and two Burmese colleagues were arrested, and today forced very publicly to walk the final few hundred meters to court. For the last week, they've been held in Yangon's most notorious prison. The men have been charged on 2 counts. Firstly, insulting the Buddhist religion, and secondly, maliciously insulting. Each of those charges carries with it a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison. Journalists aren't allowed in court and are forced to listen at windows. So it later became clear that a 3rd charge related to causing public offence had been added. Its penalty, an additional 6 months. The men pleaded not guilty to all the charges and have on Facebook issued a profuse apology. That was rejected by the monks and Buddhist groups outside court.
That picture insults Buddhism. It badly portrays the Buddha's image, so we're all upset. But it's good the authorities took immediate action.
Buddha was a compassionate man. Would he have not had forgiveness for someone who admitted they'd made a mistake?
We'll just wait and see. There are specific rules and regulations that will decide what they get.
Mr. Blackwood and his fellow defendants were returned to prison. They'll appear in court again next week. Under Burmese law, this offence is so serious that there's no point even applying for bail. Jonah Fisher, BBC News, Yangon.
And friends, pupils who survived a massacre at their school in Pakistan have been paying tribute to those who died. At least 132 children and 9 staff were killed when Taliban gunmen stormed the building on Tuesday this week, just a couple days ago. Fergal Keane reports from Peshawar in Pakistan.
There is a solemn routine to it now, a daily procession that is both mourning, bewilderment, curiosity and rage. This as the Taliban warn they'll carry out more attacks. 2 days after the attack, 8-year-old Ismail came back to school. He's been searching for a friend he saw shot in front of him.
So I want to see my friends. He will be died or he will be injured, so I want to see it.
And you want to go back to school still?
Yes, I want to come back to school because we are brave and we want to make the school again and we come to our school.
There is growing public anger here and a desire for retribution, but the Taliban remains an elusive enemy and seems undaunted by public reaction to the massacre. The tragedy has led to bitter political recrimination. The government accused of not doing enough to protect the children.
Good morning, General.
Hardline Islamists blamed for fomenting unrest in the country. This man was the former head of Pakistani intelligence, which is accused of supporting the Afghan Taliban and other terror groups. Lieutenant General Gull accuses America of manipulating the killers and of creating a climate of revenge with its drone strikes.
The allegation against you is that by supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan, you helped to create the extremism which is now threatening to devour this country.
No, not at all. We supported jihad. Jihad is not extremism.
Well, look how it's turned out.
No.
You now have this tragedy in your own country blowing back.
No, this is a wrong impression. Absolutely wrong. I love my Pakistanis. I love my country.
It would be hopeful to believe this tragedy might end Pakistan's bitter conflict. Perhaps too hopeful. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Peshawar.
Continuing the story on this event from Pakistan, the son of the headmistress who died when her school in Pakistan was attacked by the Taliban on Tuesday has told the BBC that the militants had made a number of threats against the school. As we mentioned earlier, more than 130 children and 9 members of staff were killed. Richard Galpin has this report.
Relatives, friends, and other members of the community all gathered here at the family home this morning to offer funeral prayers for the well-loved headmistress. Tyra Kazi had dedicated much of her working life to the school, a passionate believer in the importance of educating both boys and girls. But amidst the grieving, there is also anger. Her family say it was known the army public school was under threat from the Taliban.
All the army publics have been receiving threats, including her school. So she has been receiving, and it's been since long. It's been almost a couple of years. That every on and off she would tell us that she's received a threat.
And did she pass that information on to the authorities here?
All information that she gets has already passed certain authorities, because since it's an army institution, so automatically it goes through a process.
So she had told the authorities that there were these threats?
The authorities knew about it.
There was a major security alert here at the school just last year, according to officials, with teachers demanding the walls be fortified. But on Tuesday it seems the Taliban militants got inside easily, shooting dead 100 children in this auditorium in just 15 minutes. The gunmen then moved here to the administration building, where the headmistress had her office. According to the army, she was killed by a grenade after locking herself in the toilet. But the family strongly disputes this, saying when they saw her body, it was clear she'd been shot dead and she'd been trying to save her pupils.
She tried staying back, although she was given an option to run or to evacuate the place or to go out of the institute, but she did not take that.
So she chose to stay?
She chose to stay until the very last child is not out of the institute. She was incredibly brave, and I didn't know that my mother was such a great lady.
Tyra Kazi has now been laid to rest here at her ancestral village. Her family believe that if the army had provided better protection for the school, she and more than 130 children might still be alive today. Richard Galpin, BBC News, Peshawar.
Friends, we're told to watch and pray always about these events that we see, and of course this one is hopefully one that can help those of us who could perhaps influence God to speed up the return of His kingdom, might put some heart into our prayers with that part of the prayer Jesus Christ told us to pray in the model prayer in Matthew 6, where He said, "Pray, Thy kingdom come." And is not this situation with all these children that have been killed and the headmistress too, as just reported in this story, not something to give us a little bit of heartiness we can put on our prayers? God, please, Thy kingdom come. One more video on this story. Pakistan is marking 3 days of mourning following this Taliban attack on the school in Peshawar on Tuesday. Prayer vigils are being held nationwide, with Pakistani embassies across the world lowering their flags to half-mast and opening books of condolences. The BBC's Shameh Khalil spoke to attack survivor Akif Azim, one of several pupils who've returned to the school in their uniform to show their defiance, and you'll see one of them who was shot at and had to duck under something. He returned to school with blood on his uniform, as you'll see in this video.
The people have been gathering here outside the gate of the Army Public School throughout the day, putting flowers, paying respects, lighting candles. Many of these people are students who have come here in solidarity and support of their fellow students who have been attacked by Taliban militants. I'm here with one student who saw all of this happen. His name is Akif. Akif, thank you so much for speaking to me.
I'm Akif Azim. I'm 18 years old. This is my last year over here. I'm about to graduate. But this happened.
And Akif, I'm standing here with you looking at your uniform, and there's still a bit of blood on your jacket.
Yeah, if you can please show my shoulders. It's all.
Yeah, I can see blood.
There are blood stains.
What happened?
Yeah, I came downstairs. I was having my examination. So I came downstairs. I saw these 3 gunmen coming in. One of them, he was wearing blue shalwar kameez, and he just shot at me with a pistol. I ducked underneath a wall and I stayed there for at least 5 minutes. I took refuge in a classroom which was right aside of me. I stayed there for at least 1 hour and 30 minutes. Kept getting, injured guys from the auditorium. My brother was even in the auditorium. So I didn't know what he was doing and where he was. I didn't know of him, even if he was alive or not.
Akif, standing here outside the gate when this happened, where this happened, describe to me what you're feeling now.
I'm still G'd up. I want to go in. I want to enter those classrooms. I want to enter that auditorium where we used to sit and we used to, study. We are still up. They cannot defeat us. We are still up.
Do you think that you'll come back to the school?
Definitely. That's why I'm wearing my uniform and that's why I'm here. That is why I'm here.
Akif, many, many thanks. This is a message of defiance and it's also a message of support. Many students like Akif have come here in their uniforms and saying, despite the school behind me being a scene of utter devastation, they are determined to go back to school.
Friends, it's a shame to see this kind of thing happen to children. It's also a shame to see a situation where children who should be able to just be enjoying the years of childhood are drafted into a military operation. International relief organizations say thousands of children have been recruited as child soldiers in the Central African Republic, often abbreviated CAR, not standing for car, but Central African Republic. And the United Nations, often abbreviated UN, most of you will recognize that one, says that more than 600,000 children are missing out on education because of the conflict, which has seen Muslim and Christian militias pitted against each other. More than a quarter of the country's population has also been displaced. We're talking about, again, the CAR, the Central African Republic. The BBC's Patience Chinwada reports.
Forced into violence, not to be the victims of violence. The number of child soldiers has more than doubled in the last year, with aid agencies putting the figure at up to 10,000. Long-term emotional and psychological damage is obvious.
Today, all the factions and armed groups that are involved in the conflict are using children as a combatant, as a porter, and using young girls also as sexual slaves. And you see sometimes girls that are as young as 15 are pregnant or are already mothers.
The Central African Republic was plunged into violence when mostly Muslim Seleka rebels seized control of the capital in March last year, prompting a backlash by the largely Christian anti-Balaka militia. Thousands have been killed and even more displaced. And with a large chunk of the population away from their homes, children who are not forced into armed groups have very little chance to make it to school. 1/3 of classrooms have been shot at, occupied or looted.
This country has seen some very difficult moments. When the war broke out, our students had to leave. I will let you know that the Zangonya Elementary School was used as a base of the rebels. They made their base here at the school. They took all the books, the tables. In brief, they destroyed the school.
But the country's future is pinned on its children.
School allows me to learn what life is, and I'm able to see my friends again and be happy.
The Central African Republic has had a very traumatic past, and if its leaders truly care about its future, they will have to make sure that all children can go back to school. Patience Chinwada, BBC News.
This next story, friends, comes from a couple days ago. All of our stories before this have been from today, but Thursday, 18th of December. But this next story comes from 2 days ago and relates to all this we're seeing with children being killed. In Yemen, a car bomb attack killed 15 children a couple days ago on Tuesday this week. The caption with this photograph, with this news story from Tuesday, friends, reads, "The Yemeni Defense Ministry condemned what it called the cowardly terrorist attack in Rada. At least 25 people, among them 15 children, have been killed in twin car bomb attacks in the central Yemeni province of Beda, reports say. The children were inside a school bus that was passing a checkpoint manned by Shia Houthi rebels in the Rada area when the first bomb exploded. The second one went off soon afterwards near the home of a Houthi leader. The rebels blamed Sunni jihadist militants from al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. We were talking about abbreviations earlier. That one would be AQAP. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP. They blame them for the blast. They've been fighting in Rada since the Houthis overran the AQAP stronghold in October, a month after taking control of the capital. And then, friends, let's turn to a story related to weather. And for that, we go to Japan. Heavy snowfall and tidal surges have affected Japan. This from today's news. At least 5 people have died. So the pale horse that this story relates to, the fourth seal of Revelation, the fourth seal being depicted in Revelation 6 as a pale horse, which Revelation 6 says has a rider whose name is Death. And alongside this pale horse and its rider named Death rides Hades, hell, the grave. And the primary activity of this horse, as Jesus Christ described it, first was loimus, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. But Christ also said that between the third and fifth seal, we would see increasing seismus, was the word he used in Greek, meaning seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions such as gale force winds of all kinds, and soon hurricanes, tornadoes, you name them, and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes, is what's given in the Greek-English lexicons as an example. But that would also include, commotions on the ground would include tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, wildfires, floodings, and even this one out of Japan with today's story, where at least 5 people have died following heavy snowfall and tidal surges in Japan. An extreme low-pressure weather system has been dumping snow accompanied by strong winds, causing tidal surges. In the northern island of Hokkaido, over 70% of snow fell in 24 hours, leading to widespread travel disruption and causing some buildings to collapse. We'll go to Kurdistan for the next story, friends. Iraqi Kurdistan could benefit from a new oil pipeline. Iraqi Kurdistan, let me bring this photograph with the story. We actually have video on this. Let me give you a quick introduction. Iraqi Kurdistan could soon be joining the ranks of the world's major oil exporters, as the story here says, thanks to a new pipeline in Turkey. Officials hope to export up to 1 million barrels of oil a day by this time next year. Karsi Naji reports from northern Iraq.
This is the pipeline.
The man in charge of the Kurdish pipeline project says he has the near future all mapped out. Full capacity exports soon.
Economy of Kurdistan will be one of the strong, dynamic, capable economies in the Middle East.
These facilities at Khormala, an hour's drive southwest of Erbil, the capital of the Kurdish region, are at the starting point of the Kurdish pipeline that came on stream earlier this year.
This pipeline is the one that the Kurds have built for themselves to transport their oil from this region to Turkey and the Mediterranean. It has a capacity of transporting 1 million barrels of oil per day. It could make this region one of the wealthiest in the Middle East.
The advances of the Islamic State forces, although at first posed a serious existential threat to the Kurds, is now the reason for their changing fortunes. The old Iraqi pipeline taking oil from Kirkuk region to the north has been cut by the Islamic State near Mosul. Now, Iraq's only way of exporting this oil is through the Kurdish pipeline, extending across Turkey. And the recent agreement that the Kurdish Prime Minister has signed with Baghdad, although temporary, ends 11 years of dispute between the two sides over how to divide the oil riches of the north.
Of course, now we will give them 250,000 barrels per day, and we will help Iraqi to export oil from Kirkuk, 300,000. In addition to that, yes, of course, we have more oil, and from KRG we will export that oil as well.
Kurdish officials are organizing an oil conference in London this week to generate more interest from big oil companies, although many of them are already active here. Kasnaji, BBC, Kurdistan, northern Iraq.
Friends, a lot of us are happy to see a volume of oil that has been causing the prices that we pay at the gas pump to be somewhat less. And yet that's causing a lot of grief to some places around the world. It's causing a lot of grief to Russia and a lot of big companies. And where it affects a nation, we may be seeing some more strife come out of that. We'll be watching this as time goes forward. India has launched its largest rocket and an unmanned capsule into space. The 630-ton geosynchronous satellite launch vehicle, the MK3, blasted off from Sriharikota in the southern state of Andhra Pradesh early this morning. The new rocket will be able to carry heavier satellites into space.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now, press 1, press 2.
So S-200 ignite and safely clear the umbilical pedestal. The vehicle is traveling across the umbilical tower.
तेज आवाज हमारे कानों तक पहुंचती हुई अंतरिक्ष में सफर जारी रखता हुआ उड़ान LV-X प्रायोगिक उड़ान.
You can see the S's have been successfully separated and the vehicle is in autonomous.
Oh, friends, that's all the video they gave us on that. Sorry, didn't have my mic on there for a moment. We'll turn next to the United States, where the NASA is to carry out a test launch, which it hopes will eventually allow astronauts to travel to Mars. The the maiden voyage of the unmanned Orion capsule will blast off from Cape Canaveral in Florida. Science correspondent Mr. Ghosh reports on this.
NASA's plans to send astronauts to other worlds are back with a splash. The space agency will be testing this new capsule, which will be part of a new rocket system to take men and women to Mars. It'll be launched unmanned and orbit the Earth. The Orion capsule will separate and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, its heat shield tested to the limit. It has echoes of NASA's Apollo program, which took astronauts to the moon more than 40 years ago. This is the Apollo 10 capsule, now a museum piece at the Science Museum. The Orion capsule will be twice the size and have room for 4 astronauts. NASA's aim is to revive the spirit of Apollo and go back to the heady days of human space exploration of the 1960s and 70s. There'll be more tests over the next 20 years, and the eventual aim is to send astronauts to orbit Mars in 2030.
Orion is all about giving the ability for us to travel beyond Earth orbit, perhaps go back to the Moon, even to Mars or an asteroid. It's a return very much to the type of spacecraft we see here.
Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway?
Critics, though, say they're unlikely to see scenes like this again. The Orion programme, they say, lacks focus and is underfunded. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Well, friends, I know that may be of some interest to some people of us who watch, the daily news that may say, hey, great, if what's going on in the United States, for example, with the potential of the present administration about to pass out all kind of immigration cards and what have you, just to survive and to get away from what maybe is happening here. A lot of people might like to go to Mars if you could go up there and live. I'm being a little bit facetious, but not entirely, because the future of things is got the potential for being not so hot in a lot of ways. In Malaysia, the aspirational low-income part of the population is helping to drive economic growth through consumption, according to the World Bank. Malaysia has successfully tackled poverty over the last 4 decades by drawing on its rich national resources. According to the World Bank, some 49% of Malaysians in 1970 were extremely poor, and that figure has been reduced to 1% today. However, the government's next challenge is to help the lower income group to move up to the middle class, the bank says. Ulrich Zaha, the World Bank's Southeast Asia director, spoke to the BBC's Jennifer Pack.
That group is important because they make up the bulk of Malaysian society. This is the group who are looking for what's the next thing that can help me lead a better life. They're looking for a better education for themselves, but especially their children.
And does this aspirational group, is it divided between races then? Is there one particular race that is falling behind? Because Malaysia has race-based policies to help the indigenous groups and ethnic Malays over other races.
There still are today some gaps by ethnicity, so there still are some differences. These gaps are small today. There are some gaps, but they have declined, and they have declined precisely because Malaysia has put in place these policies. So when we look at overall inequality within Malaysia, the most important factor driving that inequality is income inequality.
Now, this aspirational group is important to Malaysia because they're also consumers, and Malaysia has been very dependent on consumer spending to help it through the financial crisis recently and when exports were slowing down. Do you see an increase in reliance on consumer spending in Malaysia in the coming years?
I think the recent history is, if you will, that the Malaysian consumer is unstoppable. So
they do love shopping.
I love shopping too, but I think the lesson here is that this has been a driving force of economic growth. Consumption has been driving economic growth, and we expect that consumption will continue be an important driver of economic growth.
But oil prices, I mean, obviously that's good for consumers, bad for Malaysian revenues because they're so dependent on the oil and gas revenues, which means less money to spend on infrastructure or development projects. So you say there's an impact, but how much of an impact would that have on Malaysia, and what kind?
I think in the short term, it's interesting. The impact on the fiscal balances is actually positive. The reason for that is that Malaysia just eliminated the oil subsidy. So that was a cost in the budget. Over the medium term, there may be also a revenue shortfall, and that will come to the extent that Petronas, for example, may pay over the medium term lower dividends, although that is a policy decision for the government to make. From a World Bank global projections point of view, we are still expecting a recovery for next year compared to current levels. Now, there is, however, a high downside risk, and we only have to look at the most recent developments even over the last couple of weeks to know what can happen within a very short period of time.
Friends, our last story comes from, relates to Israel, where Israel dismisses Palestinian peace deal as gimmick. The caption with this video reads, Palestinians want an end to Jewish settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel says a Palestinian effort to set a 3-year deadline for it to end its occupation of Palestinian territories is a gimmick. A draft resolution submitted by Jordan to the UN Security Council also calls for a peace accord within a year. Israeli Foreign Minister Lieberman said that without Israel's consent, nothing would change. Jordan has indicated it will not seek a quick vote, opening the way for further discussion. The U.S., which has vetoed previous resolutions it considers hostile to its ally Israel, said today, Thursday, that it would not support the move. U.S. Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said they would not support any action that would prejudge the outcome of negotiations. We have seen the draft. It is not something we would support, and we think others feel the same and are calling for further consultations. Mr. Lieberman said the draft resolution would only deepen the conflict. And the caption with this photograph that's part of the of this story, friends, refers to how the Palestinians are upset by the settlement building, which is, as the caption says, led to clashes between Israeli forces and Palestinian protesters. And the story goes on to say, certainly this will not hasten an agreement because without Israel's consent, nothing will change, he said. And I think we're repeating that part, and probably good reason for good to emphasize that one, that part of it. It would be better if the Security Council dealt with matters. Now, this is a good part of this story right here, friends, where it says, it would be better if the Security Council dealt with matters truly important to the citizens of the world, such as the murderous attacks this week in Australia and Pakistan, and not waste time on the Palestinian gimmicks. Despite Israel's objections, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said he would pursue consultations, quote, with brothers and friends at the UN. The draft text says a negotiated solution should be based. You know, that UN was formed right after World War II, and one of the first things done after World War II was, well, actually not right away. That was about 3 years later, but 1948, before Israel was given the land from the UK, with the UK pulling on out of there and just leaving Israel independent with it. This story goes on to say the draft text says a negotiated solution should be based on several parameters, including the boundary between Israel and the West Bank that existed before the 1967 six-day security agreements, and, quote, Jerusalem as the shared capital of the two states, end quote. It urges both parties to, quote, abstain from any unilateral and illegal actions, including including settlement activities that could undermine the viability of a two-state solution. Yeah, you know, the idea that this two-state solution is going to resolve this 3,500-year-old animosity that Ishmael has toward Isaac, because God gave the promises and the land to the descendants of Isaac and sent Ishmael out of the land with his mama, Hagar. But he also promised they'd be 12 chiefs or chiefdoms and have some territory of their own, and yet they'd be a thorn in the side of the rest of their brothers. And Ishmael is a half-brother of Isaac. So the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac, if I'm understanding the relationship correctly, the children that exist today would be cousins of one another. So the Palestinians are the cousins of the Israelis, and by Israelis I mean the people, mostly Judah and Benjamin and Levi perhaps, who are occupying, living in, possessing Israel, the little state nation Middle East of Israel. But there's more to Israel. I mean, the modern day tribes of Israel, Jacob had 12 sons, and we know today from the description in Genesis 49, God has opened up an understanding of where those, he said in Genesis 49 through Jacob, through Israel, he told his sons where they would be in the last days. We are now in those last days, and God has revealed where those tribes are. The two sons of Joseph primarily being the sons of Ephraim in the UK and Manasseh in the United States, brother Reuben, tribe of France, and the other brothers in different parts, mostly around Europe. In this same story, another draft resolution being put together by France is expected to call for a return to talks on a final treaty with the aim of achieving, even France is in on the act, wanting a two-state solution to the conflict. And as France puts it, they want to see it within 2 years, France giving a little slack instead of 1 year. It does not mention an Israeli withdrawal, but does lay out some of the parameters of a permanent peace deal. Good luck, Reuben. I mean, you know, trying to get a peace deal with Ishmael before Jesus Christ returns is, you watch, it's going to be a near impossibility. Of course, we know some of the things that are predicted to happen in the Middle East and to Jerusalem, with the king of the north and the king of the south, king of the north coming in and surrounding it with armies. The story goes on, direct peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians brokered by the U.S., this story says, collapsed in April. Now, here's a story that involves Israel and Germany. The Times of Israel, is tomorrow's Times of Israel, is reporting that they're several hours ahead of us, so they've already published their December 19 newspaper edition, which says the German president attends a Hanukkah party at Israeli ambassador's home. President Rivlin to visit Berlin in May. This story by Stuart Weiner, and actually he dated, even though it's published in tomorrow's The Times, it's dated, the dateline on the story is dated today at 12:25 p.m. And the caption with this photograph reads, Israeli ambassador to Germany, Yaakov Hades, Handelsmann, watches as German President Joachim Gauck lights a menorah during a ceremony to mark 50 years of ties between Israel and Germany. The photo credit for this is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And friends, I have a note to a friend sent me regarding this story that says, notice in the background in this photograph, I'm keeping it full screen for you for a moment, notice how the symbol displayed behind the men seems reminiscent of a swastika, does it not? I think my friend probably has that right. And this is in Germany now, you know, and how much can you trust Germany after what it wanted to do to the Jewish people, to maintain that position? God, you know, God tells us in His Word that God is going to use the Assyrians, which is modern-day Germany, to punish His people, and not just Judah this time. It'll be to punish all of the tribes of Israel, wherever you are around the world, who fail to do what God tells us in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. I've been hitting that a lot lately. The blessing and cursing chapters, God starts those chapters by saying, if you diligently hearken to obey the voice of the eternal, your Creator God, there will be, and to obey His commands, His statutes, His judgments, there will be one blessing after another that God enumerates in those chapters that He will give to you both individually and as a nation. And then He says, on the other hand, if you don't obey, curses. Israel and Germany, this story reads, marked the start of celebrations for the Jubilee year to their diplomatic ties. This was done yesterday with a Hanukkah party at the Israeli ambassador's home in Berlin. As we mentioned a moment ago, German President Joachim Gauck was on hand to light the traditional menorah candles at the Berlin home of the Israeli ambassador Yaakov Hadass Handelsman, and revealed that his Israeli counterpart, President Reuven Rivlin, will visit Germany during 2015. We are in the Jubilee year of ties, the year in which President Rivlin will also arrive in May for a state visit, Gauck said. We are working together to ensure that our special and friendly relations will deepen. Germany will always stand by Israel, he said. And he went on to say a little more. Friendship is proven in difficult times as well. Well, I hope you keep plenty of ketchup on hand. Rivlin's visit is scheduled to take place on May 12, the anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties. Israel and Germany share values and a common vision for the future and are working to increase the unique cooperation between the countries in various fields, the Foreign Ministry said in a statement. During the Jubilee celebrations, dozens of events are planned in both Germany and Israel, toward which Israel has budgeted $4 million, what's the Israeli money? The equivalent of $1 million United States dollars. The aim of the program, formulated by the Foreign Ministry together with other ministries, is to strengthen the connection of the younger German generation to Israel and its society, the ministry said. During the year, a delegation of young Germans is scheduled to visit Israel, and an exhibition from the Tel Aviv Art Museum will go on display in a museum in Berlin. The annual Leipzig Book Fair is to be dedicated to Israel. Likewise, the Berlin Children's Theater Festival will focus on Israel creations. There will also be a joint ceremony. There will be joint ceremonies in each of the two countries on International Holocaust Memorial Day on January 27. Israel and Germany are also planning to issue joint stamps during 2015. Very interesting that things are working to keep Holocaust Memorial alive. After the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, opinions of Jerusalem were divided on whether to open ties with Germany amid bitter resentment over the Holocaust. After reparation arrangements were hammered out over the years, in or in 1965, the decision was finally made to formally establish diplomatic relations, and the two countries have maintained close cultural trade and military ties ever since. That's terrific, but just let the God of this world put together the end time events and watch all of that quickly take a turn. Friends, that's it for this Thursday night report. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again Sunday night. We're off Friday night and Saturday night. I am here on the weekends on another channel. I have something special we are planning to do, maybe even a little surprise announcement for some for tomorrow night. But for those who tune in to Nightcast, God willing, we'll be back Sunday night. Until next time, friends, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.